My name is Madeline Carter. I'm 29 now, and I used to think the worst sound in the world was a door slamming in your face. Turns out it's a phone that won't stop ringing after 11 years of silence. It started with one missed call, then five. Then my screen filled up so fast I thought something terrible had happened. And in a way, it had. 36 missed calls from my mom. Not a text asking if I was okay. Not an apology. Just panic stacked on top of panic, like the past had finally run out of patience. I stared at that number for a long time because the last time I heard my mother's voice up close, she was standing in our hallway telling me I was making a huge mistake. She didn't threaten me with anger. She smiled like she'd already won and said I'd be back begging in a month. My dad didn't even look at me when he called me a failure. He just closed the door so hard the frame rattled, as if shutting me out could erase the version of me they didn't approve of. I was 18, and I walked away with a backpack, a laptop I'd paid for in installments, $800 from coffee shop shifts, and the one thing they didn't expect me to have, a plan. I never went back. Not after a week. Not after a month. Not after my rent was late. Not after I ate cheap food for days. Not after I cried in bathrooms where nobody could hear me. I didn't beg. I didn't ask them for anything. Which is why those 36 missed calls hit like a punch, because it meant the roles had flipped completely. Whatever was happening on their end was big enough to break their pride, and pride was the only thing they ever protected more fiercely than they protected me. I could already picture what came next. The guilt, the pressure, the public performance, the family members suddenly finding my number like it was their job. I took a breath, set my phone face down, and asked myself one question before I did anything else. When the people who threw you out come back demanding to be saved, do you rescue them, or do you finally make them face what they did? If you've ever been rejected by your own family and had to build a life from nothing, stay with me, because what happened after I returned that call brought everything full circle in a way I never saw coming. I didn't call her back right away. Not because I was playing games, but because I knew my mother. If I answered while she was in full panic, the conversation would turn into a tornado of blame and urgency, and somehow I'd be the one expected to fix everything in the first 60 seconds. So I sat there with my coffee going cold, staring at my own reflection in the black screen of my phone, and I let my mind run backward to the first time she decided I didn't belong in her house. That night wasn't a dramatic movie scene with suitcases lined up by the door. It was small and sharp, like a paper cut that keeps reopening. I had told them I'd been accepted into an online design program with a scholarship based on my portfolio. I wasn't asking for money. I wasn't asking for permission. I was just asking them to see me. And my mom looked at me like I'd confessed to wanting to throw my life away. She said graphic design was a hobby, not a future. My dad said college was non-negotiable, and if I wanted to live under their roof, I would follow their plan. When I didn't back down, my mom's voice went calm in the most terrifying way, the way people sound when they're certain they have all the power. She told me to pack my things. My dad stepped forward, pointed at the door, and called me a failure before I'd even had the chance to become anything at all. I remember my hands shaking as I grabbed my backpack and my laptop, and I remember the humiliating clarity of counting my cash on my bed like it could protect me. $800. That was my entire safety net. I walked out without turning around, because if I turned around, I might have stayed. And if I stayed, I would have spent the rest of my life pretending to be someone I wasn't just to earn love that should have been free. The first place I went was my best friend's house. I didn't tell her parents the full story at first. I just said things were bad at home and I needed a few nights. They didn't ask many questions. They saw my face, saw the way I flinched whenever a car door shut outside, and they made up the couch with a blanket that smelled like laundry detergent and normal life. Those first few days were a blur of pretending I was fine during the day and falling apart at night in the bathroom with the shower running so nobody could hear me breathe like I was drowning. I still went to school. I still smiled at teachers. I still turned in assignments. But every hour there was this moment where my stomach dropped and my brain screamed, "You're 18. You're homeless. You don't have a backup." I'd sit in class and stare at the clock, thinking about rent prices and food and whether I had enough gas to keep driving my beat-up car. I wasn't even fully afraid of being broke. I was afraid of proving my mother right. About a week in, I went to the guidance office and told them the truth in the most controlled voice I could manage. The counselor didn't gasp or pity me. She just nodded like she'd seen this before and asked if I had my documents, if I had a bank account, if I had anywhere safe to sleep. She helped me connect with a youth support center that worked with teens who'd been cut off early. I learned phrases I didn't even know existed: emergency assistance, independent youth services, legal resources, temporary housing options. It felt surreal, like I'd been dropped into an adult world without a map, and I was learning a new language just to survive. I picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop, the kind where you close at night and your feet ache so bad you can't fall asleep. On weekends, I started delivering food through an app because it didn't require an interview or a resume, just a car that could make it through another month. I remember sitting in parking lots between orders, eating leftover fries out of a paper bag because it was cheap and it was fast and it didn't ask questions. Meanwhile, my mom texted me like I was the one who had made the situation ugly. The first message wasn't, "Are you safe?" or "Do you need anything?" It was, "When you're ready to apologize and do things the right way, you can come home." My dad left a voicemail that sounded like he was doing me a favor just by speaking to me. He said I was being dramatic, that I needed to stop chasing fantasies, and that if I came back and agreed to business school, we could put this behind us. The word "behind us" made my throat tighten, because behind us is where they wanted to shove the truth, like it never happened. I didn't answer either of them. Not because I didn't miss having parents, but because I finally understood something I hadn't been able to name until then. Their love had always come with a price tag. It just took getting thrown out to see the receipt. Graduation came faster than I expected. I walked across that stage with my heart pounding like I was doing something illegal, because nobody tells you how lonely it feels to hit a milestone without family cheering for you. I saw my parents in the crowd. I saw my mom's expression, the polished smile she saved for other people. The one that said, "Look, we're proud, supportive parents," without actually being proud or supportive. After the ceremony, they tried to approach me like everything was normal, like this was a happy moment we could use as a photo opportunity. I didn't let them. I slipped away into the crowd, got into my car, and drove off with my diploma on the passenger seat and my hands shaking on the steering wheel. That night, I sat on my friend's couch and opened my laptop to search for the cheapest rooms I could find. I ended up renting a tiny room in a shared apartment I found online, the kind of listing that looks fine in pictures, and then you show up and realize the heat barely works, and someone's old smell lives in the walls. It didn't matter. It had a door that locked, and it was mine. I moved in with a garbage bag full of clothes, my laptop, and a promise I made to myself at 18 that I would rather struggle honestly than live comfortably under someone else's control. I thought the hardest part was over once I had a roof, but the truth is, that was just the beginning. Because surviving is one thing, building a life that proves them wrong is something else entirely. The first night in that apartment, I slept like someone had unplugged me. Not peaceful sleep, more like my body finally gave up after weeks of running on adrenaline and stubbornness. When I woke up, my throat was dry, my phone was full of spam emails, and the reality hit me all over again. No family safety net, no one to call if the rent bounced, no one to blame if I failed. Just me, a cheap mattress, and a room that wasn't much bigger than a walk-in closet. I told myself it was temporary. I didn't say that like a wish. I said it like a plan. Every day became a schedule so tight it felt like a trap. Coffee shop shifts, school obligations, deliveries when I could squeeze them in, and every leftover minute spent on my portfolio. Most people my age were worried about prom photos and dorm assignments. I was worried about whether my car would die mid-delivery and ruin my only source of extra income. I learned quickly that poverty isn't just being broke. It's being exhausted from making 1,000 tiny decisions that all feel like life or death. Do I buy shampoo? Or do I buy groceries? Do I pay for laundry? Or do I stretch another week and pray nobody notices? Do I turn the heat on for an hour? Or do I keep wearing 2 hoodies inside? And the whole time, I had this voice in my head that sounded exactly like my mother, counting down the days until I came crawling back. I kept waiting for my parents to show up with a real apology, something that sounded human instead of strategic. It never came. Instead, I started getting letters in the mail. Handwritten, like they were trying to look sincere. The words were always the same message dressed up in different outfits. We miss you. We worry about you. Come home so we can fix this. But every letter included some variation of their conditions. Transfer to a real college. Pick a stable major. Stop wasting time on that computer hobby. It was like they couldn't even imagine a version of love that didn't involve control. I stopped reading after the first few and shoved them into a drawer, unopened, because if I read them, I would start arguing with paper, and I didn't have the energy for that. By the time summer rolled in, I wasn't in school anymore, which should have made life easier, but it didn't. Without the structure of classes, everything blurred into work. I'd open at the coffee shop, rush home, do deliveries, fall asleep, repeat. Some days I was so tired I would stand in front of the fridge and stare at it, like the answer to my life was hidden behind the milk. My weight dropped without me trying. My face looked sharp in a way that made me seem older than 18. I hated looking in the mirror because it reminded me that I'd been forced to grow up overnight. And yet, I kept building the one thing nobody could take from me: my skills. Every spare moment I studied design tutorials, practiced typography, copied layouts just to understand how they worked, then rebuilt them in my own style. I treated my portfolio like it was a lifeboat, because it was. One afternoon, during a slow hour at the coffee shop, I had my laptop open behind the counter, tweaking a mock logo for a fake brand I'd invented just to practice. A customer I recognized from the neighborhood, a woman who always ordered the same drink and tipped, like she understood what it meant to be broke, noticed my screen. She didn't ask me if it was a hobby. She didn't laugh. She just said, "You did that." I nodded, immediately defensive, waiting for the punchline. Instead, she asked if I had more. I pulled up my portfolio, nervous, like I was handing her my diary. She scrolled for a long time without speaking, and I swear my heart was louder than the espresso machine. Then she said something that felt like oxygen. "I run a small creative studio. I could use an assistant for freelance projects. Not full-time, not a miracle, but real work. Paid work. Work that had nothing to do with my parents' definition of success." I almost said no out of reflex. My brain was trained to believe opportunity was always bait for disappointment. But I forced myself to breathe and say yes. That first freelance task was small, just social media graphics for a local business. But when I delivered it and the client loved it, I felt something I hadn't felt since before my parents threw me out. Pride that wasn't borrowed from anyone else. The woman who hired me didn't treat me like a charity case. She treated me like someone with potential, and she pushed me. She showed me how to communicate with clients, how to accept feedback without taking it personally, how to price my time so I didn't work for free out of fear. She corrected my mistakes without humiliating me, She didn't care that I didn't have a degree. She cared that I was reliable and hungry to learn. Over the next few months, my world started shifting in quiet ways. I still worked the coffee shop, but fewer shifts. Deliveries became something I did only when I needed to close a gap, not my entire survival plan. I started buying groceries that weren't just whatever was cheapest. I replaced my cracked phone screen. I paid my rent early once, and I stared at the confirmation like it was proof I belonged on the planet. That's when my parents changed tactics. Instead of telling me I'd fail, my mom started texting that she missed me. My dad left a voicemail saying they were willing to compromise. He said they could accept a community college maybe, as long as it was business-related. That word compromise made me laugh out loud in my room, because they weren't compromising. They were trying to reel me back in now that they realized I wasn't drowning fast enough. I didn't respond. I kept working, I kept learning. I finished the online program I'd been accepted to, the one they'd dismissed, and for the first time in my life, I had proof that my path wasn't just rebellion. It was real. And when I looked at my portfolio at the end of that year, it wasn't a kid's hobby folder anymore. It was a body of work that could open doors. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment the balance started to tip. Because once you become capable of building your own life, the people who tried to control you start to panic. By 19, I had a rhythm that didn't feel like survival anymore. It still wasn't easy, but it was mine. I'd cut the coffee shop down to a couple of shifts a week and kept the freelance work steady enough to cover rent without that constant math in my head. That was the first time I noticed how different my body felt when I wasn't living in fight or flight. I could eat a full meal without rushing. I could sleep without waking up in a panic. I could plan a week ahead without feeling like I was tempting fate. My portfolio started attracting real clients, not just small one-off jobs, and the woman who had first taken a chance on me introduced herself properly the day she offered me more work. Her name was Diane Holloway, and she ran her studio like a place where talent mattered more than pedigree. Diane didn't hype me up with fake compliments. She gave me standards. She'd point at my work and say, "This is strong, but here's how it becomes professional." She taught me how to ask the right questions before I started a project, how to write a simple contract so I didn't get exploited, and how to stop apologizing for charging money. When you've been raised to believe your value is conditional, you develop this reflex to earn your existence. Diane helped break that reflex by treating me like I already belonged. Around that time, I started noticing something that messed with my head in a different way. Freelance work meant I was often in other people's homes or offices, sitting across from small business owners, families, teams, watching how they talked to each other when nobody was performing. I'd see a dad bring his kid a snack without being asked. I'd hear a mother tell her daughter, "I'm proud of you," and mean it without adding a condition. I watched people disagree and still treat each other with basic respect. The more I saw it, the harder it was to keep rationalizing my own family like it was normal. It wasn't. It had never been. The love in my house was always a deal. Follow the plan, get the approval. Step outside the plan, lose the warmth. I didn't want to admit that at first because admitting it meant grieving something I'd been chasing my whole life. The call from my mom came late one evening when I was exporting a client file. I almost didn't answer. I hadn't spoken to her directly in months, only watched her messages show up like little traps on my screen. But curiosity got me. Her voice sounded softer than I remembered, like she was trying on a new costume. She asked how I was doing, and I could hear her forcing concern into her tone, like she was reading lines she didn't fully believe. Then she slid into the real reason. "Dad's work isn't going well," she said. "Things are tight." She didn't ask for money right away, not directly. She asked what I was making now. She asked if freelance was really stable. She asked if I had savings. It was the same old control, just disguised as motherly worry. When I didn't give her the answer she wanted, the softness cracked. She reminded me that family helps family, She hinted that if I came home and did things right, we wouldn't be in this awkward situation. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I didn't explode. I just said, I can't help you. And then I added something that surprised even me. You didn't help me when I needed you. There was a long silence, and then she got angry, like my boundaries were an insult. She said I was holding a grudge. She said I was ungrateful. She said my father and she had done what was best. And that was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with misunderstanding. I was dealing with a refusal to take responsibility. After I hung up, I sat on my bed and stared at the wall, and this wave of doubt hit me like it always did. Was I too harsh? Was I wrong? Was I turning into the villain in someone else's story? That night, I searched online for support groups, not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because I needed words for what I'd lived through. I found a community meeting for young adults who had been cut off, controlled, or emotionally punished for not meeting family expectations. I went once and sat in the back, telling myself I was just observing. But when someone described parents who only showed affection when you performed correctly, my throat tightened because they were describing my life. That group led me to therapy, and therapy didn't magically fix anything. What it did was give me a concept I'd never been allowed to have, that boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are safety. At 20, I started saying no without explaining myself. At 21, I moved into a small studio of my own and built a workspace in the corner where I could see my progress every day. Around then, I met Ethan Brooks at a networking event that Diane practically forced me to attend because she said hiding is not the same as healing. Ethan wasn't impressed by titles, and he didn't ask me what my parents did for a living. He asked me what I cared about. When I eventually told him the truth about my family, he didn't give me a speech about forgiveness. He asked one simple question that changed how I thought about everything. If a stranger treated you the way they treated you, would you feel obligated to keep them in your life? I didn't have an answer, but I knew the old answer, the one my mother had trained into me, was no longer going to run my life. By 22, my life looked stable from the outside. Stable enough that people stopped asking if I was okay in that careful tone they use when they think you might break. Stable enough that I could finally breathe without feeling like the floor might drop out. I had a steady stream of clients, not just random gigs, and Diane trusted me with bigger projects that required real strategy, not just pretty graphics. I learned how to pitch concepts, how to defend design decisions without getting defensive, how to take criticism and translate it into better work instead of taking it as proof I was worthless. The funny thing is, once you stop spending all your energy surviving, you start noticing what's been quietly poisoning you. For me, it was the way my parents still tried to keep a hand on my throat from a distance. They didn't call often, but when they did, it was never about me. It was always about control. My mom would send holiday emails that sounded polite on the surface but carried little knives inside them. Hope you're well. We pray you come to your senses. Your cousin just graduated with honors. Your father would love to see you make better choices. I stopped responding to most of it, not out of spite, but because I'd learned that answering was like opening a door for them to walk through, so I kept it minimal. A short reply at Christmas, a neutral message on Mother's Day. No details, no openings, just enough to be civil, not enough to be captured. At 23, I made the decision that scared me more than being kicked out. I registered my own business. It wasn't some glamorous launch with champagne and a huge office. It was a simple LLC, a small website, and a name I chose because it felt like a line in the sand. I wasn't waiting for anyone's permission anymore. I wasn't living in the shadow of their plan. I was building something with my own hands, just in a different way than they respected. Ethan moved in with me that year, and it was the first time I shared space with someone without feeling like I had to earn my right to exist there. We weren't perfect, but we were honest. We talked about money openly. We talked about goals. We talked about my parents without pretending it didn't hurt. He didn't push me to reconcile. He didn't push me to cut them off completely either. He just kept reminding me that I was allowed to protect my peace. That's when the weird shift started with my parents. My mom didn't suddenly become kind. My dad didn't suddenly become supportive. But their tone changed. The lectures got shorter. The judgment got quieter. And the messages started sounding like interest. Not warmth. Interest. Like they were watching me from behind a curtain. I noticed it when my LinkedIn profile started getting more traction. I'd post a project win or a client shout out, and within hours, my mom would react. Not comment, not say congratulations, just react, like a drive-by acknowledgement. Then she started messaging questions that felt harmless, but weren't. Are you still doing that design thing? Are you working for a company now or just freelancing? Is it stable? Are you making good money? Do you have benefits? At first I answered vaguely because part of me still had that old itch to prove myself, to show them they were wrong. But every time I gave a detail, the next message got sharper, like she was taking inventory. So I stopped. I kept my life on a need-to-know basis, and they did not need to know. Around this time, Ethan and I went to a small industry event where I ended up meeting someone who later referred me to a bigger client. It was the kind of opportunity that doesn't feel real until the contract is signed. When it finally happened, when the money hit my account, and I realized I was not only surviving but actually moving upward, I cried in my car. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I was relieved. I had built something they said I couldn't. I had done it without begging. And that should have been the end of it. It should have been the part where I moved on and they stayed in my past like a closed chapter. But success has a way of attracting the people who didn't water you when you were growing. It started with a message from my mom that made my stomach drop because I could hear the fake sweetness in it before I even opened it. She said she had been telling people about me. She said everyone was so proud. She said she wanted to invite Ethan and me over for a family get-together so we could all reconnect. Reconnect was her favorite word when she wanted something without saying it. I didn't respond right away. And within a day, my aunt messaged me too, telling me it would mean so much to my parents if I came by, that life is short, that family is everything. I felt the old guilt try to rise, that automatic programming that tells you you're cruel for having boundaries. But then I remembered the night I left. The smirk, the slammed door, the word failure. And I remembered that nobody had cared about life being short when I was 18 and trying to figure out where I would sleep. I wrote back a polite no. I said I was busy. I said I hoped they were well. And that should have been the end. Instead, my mom posted something online that made my hands go cold. It was a photo from years ago, a cropped picture of me at my graduation, one I hadn't seen since the day I walked away from them. The caption was all heart emojis and proud mother language, talking about how blessed she was, how she always knew I'd do great things, how her daughter was so talented. People commented like she had supported me the whole time. People praised her for being such a good mom. And the worst part wasn't that she lied. It was that she lied so easily. Like my suffering was just a gap in the story she didn't feel like including. Ethan saw my face and asked what was wrong. I handed him my phone. He read it once, then again, then looked at me and said, "This is not pride. This is positioning." That word hit like a warning bell, because I knew exactly what came after positioning. It wasn't love, it was leverage. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just my mom being my mom, rewriting reality the way she always had. But once she posted that photo, it was like she opened a door she couldn't close again. The messages started coming in from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, people who suddenly cared about my life now that they thought it could be useful. They didn't ask how I'd survived at 18. They didn't ask where I'd lived, or how many jobs I worked, or how long it took before I stopped waking up afraid. They just said things like, "Your mom talks about you all the time. You should come by. Your parents miss you. You only get one family." Every line sounded like kindness until you looked closer and saw the pressure underneath. I kept my replies short. "Thanks. Hope you're well. Busy right now?" I didn't argue because arguing would mean I was still playing their game. Then my mom's texts shifted from sentimental to urgent so fast it gave me whiplash. One day she was talking about reconnecting. The next she was asking if Ethan and I could stop by for a quick chat. Not dinner, not a visit, a quick chat. Like my life was an errand. I didn't respond. I let it sit. And that's when my phone blew up. 36 missed calls in one morning. 36. Not spread out through the day. One after another like a siren. My mom. My aunt. A cousin. Then my dad's number, which I hadn't seen pop up in years. I stared at the screen and felt my body do what it used to do back when I was 18. Heart racing, stomach twisting, brain scanning for the fastest way to stop the panic. Only this time, I wasn't a kid with a backpack and $800. I was 29 with a business, a partner, and the ability to choose. Ethan walked into the kitchen and knew something was wrong before I spoke. I showed him the call log. He didn't tell me to answer. He didn't tell me to block them. He just asked, "What do you want to happen next?" That question grounded me, because my parents had always treated me like a tool. Ethan treated me like a person. I listened to the voicemails instead of calling back, because I wanted facts before emotion. My mom's voice was shaky, but not in a way that sounded like genuine remorse. It sounded like fear. She said, "We need you." She said, "It's serious." She said, "Please call me back right now." Then my aunt's voicemail came in hot with judgment. She said I needed to stop being stubborn. She said my parents were in trouble and it would be selfish to turn my back. She said, "After everything they did for you, you owe them." That line made me laugh out loud, but it was the kind of laugh that comes from disbelief, not humor. My dad's voicemail was the one that surprised me. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered, like he'd run out of breath trying to hold on to pride. He didn't apologize. He didn't say he was wrong. He just said, "We're dealing with a situation. We need to talk. Call your mother." The old version of me would have rushed over just to stop the chaos. The old version of me would have shown up hoping this crisis would finally force them to love me properly. But I'd learned enough by then to recognize a pattern. My parents didn't call because they missed me. They called because they needed something. And if they needed something, it meant they were about to try to take it. I called one person back, not my mom. I called my cousin who wasn't as deep in the family drama, the one who had always been neutral. She hesitated at first, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to tell me. Then she said it. My dad had been laid off months ago. He'd been telling everyone it was temporary, that he'd find something else, that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. They'd fallen behind on their mortgage. They were buried in credit card debt. And now there was a notice, a real one, a deadline. If they didn't come up with the back payment, they'd lose the house. That part alone was bad, but it wasn't what made my stomach drop. What made my stomach drop was what my cousin said next. "Your mom posted again." I opened Facebook with my hands shaking, and there it was. A long, emotional post about hard times and faith and family sticking together. She didn't use my name, but she didn't have to. She wrote about being blessed to have a successful daughter who would never let her parents suffer. She talked about how proud she was that I was supporting them through this trial, supporting them, like it was already decided, like my money was already theirs. The comment section was full of people praising me, praying for them, and reminding everyone that family comes first. and woven through all of it were little hooks aimed straight at me. I'm sure she'll do the right thing. She's a good girl. She won't abandon them. It was a trap built out of public pressure. Exactly the kind of trap my mother loved, because it made her look like the victim and me look like the villain before I even opened my mouth. I felt that familiar anger, hot and fast. Not because they needed help, but because they were still trying to control me with shame. Still trying to rewrite the story so that I was responsible for cleaning up their mess, and if I didn't, I'd be the monster. Ethan sat next to me and watched my face change as I read. He didn't interrupt. When I finally put the phone down, he said quietly, "Don't answer the post. Answer the reality." He reminded me that public arguments become content for people who don't care about the truth. He told me to decide what I could live with, emotionally and financially, and then build boundaries that would hold. So I did what my parents never expected me to do. I got strategic. I pulled up old messages, screenshots of my mom telling me to come home only if I apologized, and followed their plan. The voicemail where my dad called me a failure. The years of silence unless they wanted something. I wasn't collecting receipts to be petty. I was collecting clarity. Because I knew what was coming next. If I helped, they'd claim they earned it. If I refused, they'd tell everyone I was cruel. Either way, my mother would perform. The only question was whether I would let her direct the stage. That night, Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table and talked numbers. What could I afford without damaging my business? What kind of help would actually solve the problem instead of feeding it? And what conditions would protect me from being dragged back into the same cycle? I didn't sleep much. Not because I was torn about saving them, but because I was preparing for a confrontation I'd been avoiding for 11 years. In the morning, my phone started vibrating again. More calls, more messages, more guilt. I finally typed one sentence to my mom and hit send before I could second-guess myself. "I will meet you. Neutral place. One conversation. My terms." Then I turned my phone off, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to show up as the desperate kid they threw out. I was going to show up as the woman they underestimated, and this time, they were the ones about to learn what that really meant. I picked a coffee shop halfway between my place and theirs, the kind of spot where nobody could raise their voice without strangers staring. Neutral territory, no home court advantage. I showed up early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to sit with my own thoughts before they tried to fill the air with theirs. When my parents walked in, I barely recognized the version of them that came through the door. My dad looked smaller, like his confidence had been peeled away layer by layer. My mom's eyes were puffy, but her posture was still rigid, still rehearsed, like she'd practiced being the victim in the mirror. She spotted me and rushed over as if we were close, as if she hadn't thrown me out and bet on my failure. She reached for my hands and started talking before she even sat down. "Thank God you're here," she said, like my presence alone was a promise. I didn't take the bait. I gently pulled my hands back and waited until they sat. Then I said the one sentence that stopped her momentum cold. "Today I'm going to talk. You're going to listen. For once." My mom opened her mouth, but my dad looked at her, then at me, and nodded like he knew he didn't have the energy for games. I took a breath and laid the past on the table in the simplest words possible. Not dramatic, not poetic, just true. I reminded them of the night I was 18, of how I told them about the scholarship and the program, and how my mother smirked and told me I would be back begging in a month. I reminded my dad that he called me a failure and slammed the door like he was proud of it. I told them what happened after, the couch I slept on, the jobs, the delivery shifts, the nights I cried where nobody could hear me, the mornings I went to work with no idea how I'd make rent. I told them I didn't say that to make them feel guilty. I said it because they had spent 11 years pretending it never happened. My mom tried to cut in with the familiar line about doing what they thought was best. I held up my hand. No, you don't get to justify it first. You don't get to rewrite it into love. You kicked me out because I didn't fit your plan. That was control, not parenting. Her face tightened like my honesty was an insult. She tried another tactic. We were scared for you, she said. We wanted you to have stability. Family is supposed to help each other. I stared at her and felt something settle inside me, something calm and firm. I said, where was that family when I was the one who needed help? Where was it when I was 18 and sleeping on someone else's couch? Where was it when I was working until my hands shook just to eat? You didn't help me then? You watched and waited for me to beg so you could win. My dad swallowed hard and looked down at the table. My mom's eyes filled again, but I'd learned the difference between tears and accountability. I let the silence sit long enough for it to feel uncomfortable. Then I slid my phone across the table, screen facing up, with her Facebook post open. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just asked, why did you post this? My mom's cheeks flushed. She said she was grateful for my emotional support. She said people assumed things. She said she didn't mean it that way. I leaned forward just slightly. You meant it exactly that way. You used the internet to pressure me because you thought shame would work better than honesty. You turned strangers into weapons because you didn't trust me to say yes without force. Ethan was right. It wasn't pride. It was positioning. My mom's voice got sharper, and for a second I saw the old version of her, the one who believed love was a leash. She said, we're your parents. You can't just leave us to lose our home. You're doing well. You can afford it. That sentence was the moment the full circle snapped into place. When I was 18, they treated my future like something they owned. Now they were treating my success like something they deserved. I sat back and said, I'm going to be clear because this is the last time we do this dance. I can help once. One time. Not because I owe you. Not because you earned it. Because I choose to close this chapter without carrying it like a weight for the rest of my life. My mom exhaled like she'd won, and I watched her start to smile. Then I finished my sentence. But it comes with conditions, and if you refuse them, you don't get my help. The smile disappeared. My dad finally looked up. I said, first, you're deleting that post today, and you're making a new one that tells the truth. You will say, I am not responsible for your finances, that you put me under pressure, and that you are handling this privately. You will do it in your own words, but it has to be clear. No hints. No vague guilt. If you use my name again as leverage, we're done. My mom started to protest, but my dad's shoulders slumped like he knew they didn't have options. I continued. Second, you're downsizing. You are not keeping a house you can't afford just to maintain appearances. You're going to sell it and move somewhere you can actually pay for without pretending and panicking. Third, if you want any relationship with me going forward, we do therapy together. Not because I want a perfect family, because I want honest communication and real boundaries. And fourth, you respect my life, my business, my relationship, my choices. You don't get to critique them, recruit relatives against me, or treat me like an extension of your reputation. If any of that happens, I go no contact, no calls, no surprise visits, no messages through family. Email only, and only if it's respectful. The coffee shop felt too quiet when I stopped talking. My mom looked like she wanted to argue, but even she could feel the shift. This time, I wasn't asking for love. I wasn't begging to be understood. I was stating terms like an adult, and the power imbalance she'd relied on was gone. My dad's voice came out rough when he finally spoke. He said, we don't have a choice, do we? I met his eyes and said, you had a choice when I was 18. You chose the door. Now I'm choosing the boundary. My mom whispered that it was humiliating to post a correction. I didn't flinch. You didn't mind humiliating me when you told me I'd come back begging. You didn't mind humiliating me when you called me a failure. You don't get to demand dignity from the person you refuse to give it to. That line hit her harder than anything else, because it wasn't cruel. It was fair. They sat there for a long moment, and then my dad nodded. He didn't apologize fully. He didn't suddenly become tender. But he said, "Fine, we'll do it." My mom's eyes flicked around like she was calculating how to twist it, but she nodded too. I opened my banking app and showed them what I was willing to cover, the exact amount needed to stop the immediate crisis, nothing more. I told them I would pay it directly to the lender, not hand them a blank check they could drain. My mom didn't like that. She tried to say it was complicated. I said, "Then you don't need my help." Her mouth shut. My dad scribbled down the account details with hands that shook just a little, and then something happened that I didn't expect. My dad cleared his throat and said, "You did okay. Better than okay. Not how I pictured it, but you did good." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close to making up for what he'd done, but it was the first time he'd acknowledged reality without trying to bend it to his ego. I didn't soften. I didn't reach across the table and pretend we were healed. I just nodded once and said, "I know," because I did know. I'd known since the first time I paid rent with money I earned, since the first client who trusted me, since the moment I realized I didn't need their approval to be real. After we left, Ethan was waiting in the car, not to rescue me, but to be there the way my parents never were. I told him what happened, and he squeezed my hand and said he was proud of me, not for helping them, but for protecting myself. Later that day, my mom deleted the post. Then she posted the correction. It wasn't perfect. It was clunky and uncomfortable, and you could tell she hated every word. But it was there, and the comments changed. Some people were confused. Some went quiet. A few relatives tried to message me anyway, but this time I didn't feel that old panic. I sent one calm reply. "This is between me and my parents. Please respect that." Then I stopped answering. Over the next month, my parents listed their house. They moved into a smaller place. Therapy started. It was awkward and slow and sometimes infuriating because accountability doesn't feel natural to people who've spent their lives avoiding it. But the point wasn't to turn us into a picture-perfect family. The point was to stop the cycle. And the biggest change wasn't in them. It was in me. One night, I opened my phone and looked at the call log that used to haunt me. Those 36 missed calls felt like a ghost trying to pull me back into the past. I held my thumb over the screen and deleted them one by one. Not out of satisfaction, out of closure. 11 years earlier, my mom had smirked and said I'd come back begging. I never did. And when the circle finally closed, the real revenge wasn't watching them panic. It was realizing I could choose compassion without surrendering my dignity. I could help without being controlled. I could forgive pieces of the past without handing anyone permission to hurt me again. That's the lesson I wish I'd learned at 18. You are not selfish for having boundaries. You are not ungrateful for refusing manipulation. Love that demands you abandon yourself is not love, it's a contract, and you are allowed to walk away. Build your life anyway. Build it slowly, honestly, on your terms. And when the people who doubted you finally come knocking, you don't have to beg for a seat at their table. You get to decide who earns a place in your life. If you've ever had to set boundaries with family, I'd love to know how you handled it. Did you feel guilty? Or did you feel free? Thank you for listening. All stories on this channel are entirely fictional and are designed to share educational lessons, useful knowledge, and positive values with our viewers. What I love about this script is the educational value behind it. It shows how knowledge, resilience, and healthy boundaries can change a person's life. It reminds us that real growth comes from learning from pain, protecting your self-worth, and building a future on your own terms. If this story helps you reflect or make a positive choice, then it's done its job.